It's the fastest growing disease on Earth. Nearly 2 million Americans will be diagnosed this year, and unfortunately, the chances are good that we or someone we know has been or will be affected by cancer. Tonight, the evolving way we fight this disease and the cutting-edge role St. Louis is playing in that fight. So stay tuned. And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned. The 9 Network will devote 6 hours of programming over 3 nights, starting Monday night, in a new Ken Burns documentary about cancer called Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies. Here's a preview of that documentary and a good place to start tonight's conversation.
Cancer is a worldwide scourge, the fastest growing disease on Earth. By 2030, there will be as many as 22 million cases worldwide. Cancer afflicts 1.7 million Americans each year and kills 600,000 of them. More will die from cancer over the next 2 years than died in combat in all the wars the United States has ever fought, combined. 1 in 2 American men and 1 in 3 American women will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetimes, and nearly everyone will be close to someone who suffers from it.
Make no mistake, this is one of the most significant human challenges in our history. To imagine that we will find a simple solution to this, I think doesn't do service to the true complexity of the problem.
Cancer is part of our genetic inheritance. We will always have cancer amidst us, within us, amongst us.
Joined by 3 men who are at the cutting edge of what is going on around this topic here in St. Louis. Let me introduce the table that we have to start off with here tonight. Dr. John DiPerzio, the Siteman Cancer Center, Dr. Rick Wilson with the Genome Institute, and Dr. William Galanders, Washington University School of Medicine. Thank you all for being here. Let me just start by asking you where we are in this fight against cancer. In the documentary, it goes back to President Johnson. Every president from then on has talked about we're on the cusp of a breakthrough in their State of the Union speech. Where are we now? Are things any different now than they were 10 years ago?
I think so. The main thing is that we know a lot more about the disease now than we did before. Knowledge is power. You can't fix anything unless you know what the moving parts are. So that's been the major advance over the past decade. We really understand the process a lot better. Treating these diseases is going to take us into the next decade. It's going to be very difficult to develop treatments that are really effective in these complicated diseases. But it's all possible if you know what causes the disease and what are some of the underlying abnormalities that contribute to the disease.
Is this a disease we can cure, or is this something we will always have and we're learning to treat it differently? How do you approach cancer? What are you thinking about? What are you talking about?
Well, there's an important concept to understand is that cancer is really a whole host of diseases, and you can't treat everyone the same. So while you see specific cancers where there's a tremendous amount of progress having been made in terms of developing new therapies, these aren't effective across all patients. So one of the things that we've done in the last 10 years to understand these diseases is to start to look at their DNA and to understand, what is the defect at the heart of this particular disease, this particular patient's disease, and what can we learn about that to treat it more effectively.
So it's different from cancer of the liver to kidney cancer, or can it be different from two kidney cancer patients even individually?
Yes to all of the above. You know, lung cancer and kidney cancer can be very different. They can also have similarities, but even two lung cancer patients can have a very different disease that needs very different treatment.
It's been said as we've been getting ready for this show that you don't want to be too tongue-in-cheek about cancer, but if you're going to have cancer, St. Louis is a good place to have it. Is that true?
Well, I think that there are national leaders in St. Louis in the treatment of cancer, and we are making remarkable strides in understanding cancer. And one of the things that I would just echo that Dr. Wilson said is that we are starting to look at the DNA of cancer. And one of the amazing things that we're finding is that it's incredibly complex. And so even though we've learned so much in the last decade, we've also come to appreciate that it is an incredibly complex disease, and the answers will be difficult as well. So I think that's important to remember.
What are you talking about at the Genome Institute? Because I know you had one of our senators was there recently, along with the head of the National Institute of Health, and you gave a presentation. What's going on with the DNA with cancer in your world?
Well, I think in a lot of ways we're just scratching the surface. I mean, in the laboratory over the last 20 years, we've learned how to do some pretty amazing things. And the thing that we're really talking about a lot these days, is, as we've already touched on here, is how do we use the patient's DNA, how do we use their genome to understand what's gone wrong? And one of the things that we've done with government funding from the National Cancer Institute over the last 10 years is to start to look at the DNA of several patients, several hundred patients with the same type of cancer, to learn what goes wrong in this type of disease. A discovery that our lab actually contributed about 10 years ago was a discovery that some patients with lung cancer, and these tend to be non-smokers with lung cancer, actually have a mutation in a gene that is very treatable by a particular new drug. And so one of the things that happens now for a newly diagnosed lung cancer patient is they want to know, do they have a mutation in this gene, EGFR? And if so, they're likely a very good candidate to go immediately on that targeted therapy.
So is there something to do with the world that we live in terms of our technological advances that allows you to do what you do? Is it all tied together?
It is. I mean, you know, we launched a project back in 1989 called the Human Genome Project, which us biologists refer to as our moonshot. And the idea back in those days was, let's sequence the entire human genome, at least from one person, before we try to do it on additional people, to see what we can learn about our basic operating system, if you will. We started that project long before we had the technology to actually accomplish it, which is exactly the same thing we did when we decided to go to the moon. And through the course of the project, we actually built up technology that allows us now to be able to sequence an individual human genome in just a few days for just about $1,000.
What do you guys talk about when you're amongst your colleagues? What are the other innovations that we'll soon hear about in coming out of St. Louis or research across the country or other parts of the world? What's exciting you about the fight against cancer?
I mean, I think we're, you know, in addition to really being a leader in the world of cancer genomics, I think we're very good at developing basic science insights into some of the aspects of normal physiology that affect cancer growth, like immunology and immunotherapy. How does the immune system actually control diseases on a day-to-day basis?
Getting your body to fight the cancer itself?
Is cancer only a disease of cancerous cells, or is it also a disease of an immune defect such that the cancer gets a little bit of a break from the normal immune surveillance of the patient? And you know, we can focus on that and understand some of the basic issues relating to immunology and take advantage of those understandings to sort of target the immune system to actually make it work better. And if you can make the immune system work better, you're going to actually control diseases much better in general. It's almost a preventative approach, if you will. The other thing is I just play I'm the ultimate optimist as an oncologist, but I also want to, I'd like people to understand that this is a very difficult problem, as Will was saying. These are very complex diseases. You and I have the same number of muscles, and we have the same number of bones, and we have the same number of nerves, but we physiologically probably behave very differently, right? We respond to stimuli differently, we adapt to our environment differently. So there must be differences beyond our genetic code that actually allows us to grow faster or move quicker or think better or adapt to our environment better. So those are the kinds of things that, above and beyond knowing the sequence of a tumor, people have to figure out in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I think one of the things that I worry about is that, that there has to be a realistic expectation in that, for instance, 50, 60 years ago, a disease called sickle cell anemia is a disease where there's only one nucleotide change from the normal genetic code for one of the genes that encodes for globin gene synthesis for hemoglobin. And when that one genetic mutation occurs, you get this disease called sickle cell anemia, which is a terrible disease. Knowing that single mutation, it's still taken us 50 to 60 years to figure out all about the physiology of that disease, how that one little mutation, never mind a cancer cell that may have hundreds of mutations, how that one little mutation can affect the biology of the blood-forming system, and also how do you fix it? How do you fix it? It's not easy. Suddenly, I think, over the past 10 years, we've been developing some of the
Does that mean
tools.
we're 50 or 60 years away from?
I think we cure some diseases right now. There are a number of diseases that are curable that were not curable 10, 20 years ago. Childhood leukemia is an excellent example. Chronic myelogenous leukemia in the adult setting. We treat people with a drug that's a targeted drug that puts people into a chronic phase of the disease where they can live a normal life like you and I. And so that they really aren't affected by their disease whatsoever, which in my view is a cure.
You asked me before the show if we would have any input from outside of the walls of this building, and I said we would try. So let's do that right now. Find us hashtag StayTunedSTL. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Let's just see what folks are talking about. Clear about, make sure I understand what we've talked about so far. Are you saying, has how we even view cancer, is that changed, is that radically changed in terms of just how we even view the disease?
Well, I think you should define radically, but in some ways I would say yes. I said a little earlier that there are some cases of lung cancer and kidney cancer that might be similar. We tend to think, and I'm not picking on my physician colleagues here, but we tend to think about cancer with regard to what organ or what type of tissue it's impacted. So there's lung cancer, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, leukemia, blood cancer. But quite often, we'll find that the same gene seems to be at the root of two very different types of disease. And we can start to think about are there treatment pathways that are in common? We have a colleague who was diagnosed with leukemia a few years ago and actually sequenced his genome, and we found a mutation that was driving one particular gene to be expressed way, way more than it should have been, and it was probably driving his disease. The best candidate treatment for him was a drug that was approved for use in kidney cancer patients, but not in leukemia. And so FDA now has to kind of take a look at how do we change the way that we, approve drugs for certain types of disease.
Did you give him the drug?
Yes, this is his doctor, so.
And what happened?
He went into remission.
Is this kind of what we're talking, there's a Time magazine cover article where they have two women with the same type of brain tumor. One receives traditional treatment and the other receives individualized treatment. I've seen individualized talked about. What does that mean? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you look at the DNA of a particular cancer, you begin to understand details about that specific cancer, what drives that specific cancer. And oftentimes those insights do provide the opportunity to use personalized therapy. So, we know that normally you treat breast cancer with these specific drugs. But if you know what's driving that breast cancer through sequencing the DNA or other insights, then you might say, oh, those drugs aren't going to work. Let's try different medications. So that's beyond the concept of personalized medicine, I think. Tailoring therapy to the particular cancer.
It sounds expensive, or is it?
It's not necessarily. Not necessarily. I mean, and in fact, it may be a way to save money, because if you can choose the best and most appropriate therapy, it's going to be more successful and less expensive in the long run.
I know research takes money, though. Is that fully funded? And that's a loaded question. But what is the state of research as you see it?
Well, it's way underfunded. So you asked earlier about a visit from one of our senators. I mean, this was part of the message, is that we're doing great things here. The NIH and the National Cancer Institute have been very supportive of a lot of the work, but there's so much more to do, as John was suggesting earlier.
Back to St. Louis for just a second. Is there some sort of momentum here that goes beyond having the two medical schools, or is that what's driving a lot of what we see in terms of the work that we're doing? We're going to hear more later about some goggles that help the doctors see the cancer and other things we're going to talk about. But what's going on in St. Louis?
So I'm not from St. Louis, but I came here about 20 years ago, and I would say in the institution that I live in now, Washington University, it's always had a strong and long history of very good basic research. So it's always been a very strong basic research institution. Actually, 20 years ago, I think the translational research apparatus or infrastructure was underdeveloped. And I think that what's been the most unique aspect of growth here is that the basic science productivity has remained steady or improved, while the translational and clinical infrastructure has really boomed. And so you need both, right? Because you get insights into the biology of the disease from seeing a patient, and you get insights about how to treat a patient by understanding the biology of the disease. So you need both people being at the top of their game. Just like fielding a baseball team, you can't field a winning baseball team with just all third basemen. You need somebody that hits home runs, and you need somebody that can actually fill in as a utility fielder. You need all sorts of strengths and capabilities. And I think the really amazing thing here is that the clinical and translational strength of at least the institution that I'm in has been really dramatically strengthened over the past 20 years, so that it's world-class. And it's rare to see that kind of world-class group of people sitting beside world-class basic scientists. It's rarely seen in academics today.
One last question is just, I think a lot of people who have been personally touched by this would want to know, are we close to something significant? Are we 5 years? Do you even like to talk in those terms? 10 years, 15 years from now, will we not be seeing 1.7 million Americans diagnosed in a single year? Are we close to a cure?
Well, I think that we're attacking it one disease at a time. And for many cancers, we have identified a cure, and we are successful, and we're slowly getting to the point where more and more of them can be treated effectively.
We'll leave it there for now. we want to go, thank you all for your time, I appreciate it. Well, I mentioned the cancer goggles. The 9 Network's Jim Kircher explains why this technology that's been developed here in St. Louis is getting international attention.
In February of 2014, breast cancer surgeon Julie Margentaler stepped into the operating room at the Siteman Cancer Center in St. Louis and covered her eyes. For the first time and numerous times since, she used high-tech goggles that allowed her to see cancerous tissue in ways she never could before, in real time, lit up like a Christmas tree.
When you saw what you saw, how cool was that?
It was very cool. We weren't sure we would see that. We had a very good feeling that we would based on all of our animal data, but until you do it for the first time, you just don't know if it's going to act the same way in a human as it does in a mouse or a rat. And so we have 2 views that we take. This is called the...
Cancer surgeons have plenty of images of tumors, mammograms, and other scans, and they use those as guides, because in surgery, this is not what they see with the naked eye. And while we talk about breast tumors as lumps, they are not as clearly defined as that sounds.
There's these little spiculations that come out from the tumor, and that's where we really get our indeterminate nature of our tumor.
So surgeons take the main target, the cancerous mass, and then some of the surrounding tissue in an attempt to get all of the cancer.
But at the end of the day, you don't know that until your pathologist really takes several days to microscopically evaluate all those edges. And the reality is that about 10, even as much as up to 40% of the time, we're frankly wrong. We just don't see that microscopic extension.
And that means going back in for more surgery. The hope is, and this is being tested, that the goggles will help surgeons remove all the cancer the first time, significantly reducing the number of additional surgeries.
This is the head-mounted display, and this is the camera attached.
The goggles look deceptively simple. They are, in fact, a complicated device, integrating sophisticated engineering, optics, biochemistry, and data processing.
So whatever the camera sees is shown here.
Suman Mandal is one of the graduate students on the Washington University Medical School team, led by Dr. Samuel Achulefu. He started working on this after a surgeon asked him if there was anything he could come up with that would help surgeons see cancer in the operating room.
And that's what got me to thinking, what kind of methods or devices can one create that's simple, with no footprint in the operating room, so that it's much easier to use. So there were many challenges along the way, and today we've reached to the stage where is something that we know will be a game changer in the operating room. So what happens is then that...
Here's how it works. A patient is injected with a chemical marker that latches onto the cancerous cells. This can't be seen by the human eye, but it does show up under infrared light.
The light source is on right now, so it's exciting the dye in the vial. So exactly what I'm seeing, you can see in the laptop there.
The camera on the goggles picks up both the visible light image and the infrared image of the glowing cancer cells. And this is where it gets tricky.
This is the waste pouch which has the processing unit.
Both images are sent to the processor, worn in a pack by the surgeon. They're combined there into a single image and sent back to be displayed on the inside of the goggles.
All within a fraction of a second, back to the surgeon's vision, such that what they now see is an object. It has to be oriented in such a way that is displayed in a way the surgeon will not even realize that processing is going on behind the scene to display those images. So that's how basically it works.
All of this might bring to mind military night vision goggles or something you'd wear for a video game. And in fact, it does draw on some of those same technologies. And already there's a new generation of medical professionals who have grown up with this kind of stuff.
And we believe that the younger clinicians coming up today, they are very comfortable with gadgets. And the cooler it is, the better it is for them to apply that.
I think that surgeons would welcome a tool that they could wear as long as it's ergonomically viable in the operating room, but I think they would welcome a tool that they could wear that would guide their surgery in a way that has never been able to be possible before.
The Washington University team is working to make this system wireless and the goggles transparent. And they're awaiting FDA approval for an improved chemical marker. So far, the goggles have been used on breast and skin cancer operations, and they are still in the testing phase. But already, Dr. Margenthaler and other surgeons who are using the goggles are encouraged, if not downright amazed, by what they've seen.
Okay, let's talk about prevention. Maybe something we can do about this, and how has that changed? Introductions. Dr. Graham Kolditz from the Siteman Cancer Center. Thanks for being here. April Zubik, American Cancer Society. Thank you as well. Also Angela Claiborne, Myrtle Hilliard Davis Comprehensive Health Centers, Inc. Thanks for being here. And Beverly McKee, Breast Cancer Warrior. Yes. 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women will suffer from cancer in their lifetime. That's a shocking statistic. Is there anything we can do about that? Is this a losing proposition? 1 in 2, one of us, statistically speaking.
We can prevent more than half of cancer. We can avoid smoking, avoid weight gain, lose weight, cut back or avoid alcohol, change other parts of our diet. So there are plenty of things we could already be doing to cut the chance of cancer.
You agree?
Absolutely agree. And tobacco and obesity are major things that are affecting cancer death rates, cancer diagnosis rates. There's a lot we can do right here in Missouri. In Illinois, we're lucky we have smoke-free laws that are very strong. In Missouri, we have the lowest tobacco tax. We don't have comprehensive smoke-free state. These things could help a lot and provide some funding to make sure that kids don't start smoking. And obesity, I think, is an area that we're learning more and more about. But research from the American Cancer Society shows that obesity can increase your chances of more than 10 different types of cancer.
And is prevention changing too? Is there a different way, a paradigm shift of any kind that you've seen when it comes to prevention?
I think this obesity story, really in the space of 15 years, we've gone from sort of knowing that obesity is related to postmenopausal breast cancer and endometrial cancer to now this much longer list of cancers, understanding also whether it's weight gain early in life, later in life, and the implications of that for where we should focus our prevention efforts.
It seems, am I the only one that thinks this is a kind of a scary conversation to have?
I think it's scary, but if you've been diagnosed with cancer and you're a survivor like I am, it's something that's very much a part of your world every day. And so I think by talking about it, it takes away some of the fear. I also think that sometimes when people find something wrong or they have that gut instinct that something's wrong, they're afraid to go to the doctor. And by having these conversations just like this, I think that will get people to the doctor more quickly. It could be nothing, but we also know that the sooner that we find cancer and the sooner we start treating it, that the odds of survival increase dramatically.
Do you see that, Angela? People are afraid to just even find out that they might have something wrong.
Yes, we see that at the health center. That's why we have a lot of health intervention programs.
Is it with men? I think traditionally that's how we think of us guys.
Men traditionally, but most often low-income individuals, period, because they want to avoid the cost of treatment and knowing that they're sick. So for us at the health center, we provide preventive services for all of our patients. That's actually a trend with HRSA, which is our main funder, that we screen for those types of cancers. So we do the tobacco screening for every patient that visits the health center. We provide a lot of screening tools for our patients. And once we provide those trainings, we give them education and direct them to resources. For example, just giving a small example, we provided almost 1,200 mammogram testing and 52 were abnormal findings, and we were able to direct those patients to Siteman Cancer Center and some of the other resources, but they came into the health center. So as she was stating, if you just go to your doctor, you can receive those services and learn a lot. So
there are a lot of people that don't have access to what you're talking about? There
are a lot. At our center, we serve 30,000 persons each year, and 15,000 are uninsured. That's why we're there. We're there as a federally qualified health center to take care of individuals without insurance. And of those persons I talked about that were screened, half of those persons were uninsured. But we have some pilot programs, such as Gateway to Better Health, that help with our funding for our patients. They provide specialty funding, so when we send those patients, they actually pay for it. That came about through the St. Louis Connect closure, an awesome program. So it's there, but we need awareness. Patients need to, or individuals really need to visit the FQAC's community health centers as they may know it in St. Louis. That's where we're there. We're the safety net for that population.
This is the country where we're supposed to be the best at chronic diseases and crisis type situation, but if you don't have access to it, that doesn't matter, I guess.
Right, you go.
There's the fear of the test and there's the fear of the cost, but I have two things to say to that. One is it's Colon Cancer Awareness Month. So for example, part of the barriers in getting people screened is that they just don't want to get that test. Someone who is going through colon cancer will say the little bit of uncomfort or unease that you're going to have in getting this test is better than going through chemotherapy. The other thing is there's resources out there, and oftentimes people don't know that they're there until they need it. For breast cancer, for example, there's the National Breast and Cervical Cancer Early Detection Program, which is a very long word, but in Missouri, we call it Show Me Healthy Woman. And it's a program that we fight for funding for every single year, and it provides breast and cervical cancer screenings to people who don't have insurance or are underinsured. And if there's a diagnosis, the great thing about this program is it'll see you through treatment.
We were talking about what can we do. Is there a way to break down how much of what we're dealing with here is a predisposition, kind of a genetic situation that you can't do anything about, and how much of it is something you can do about? Is there a way to, do we know that? Can we break that down?
Sure, I think we can break out a subset of most cancer sites, breast, ovary, other sites where there's a known hereditary component. But usually we're talking 5 to 10% of all the cancers, leaving really, say, the other 90% that's largely driven by our lifestyle and environment, non-directly inherited genetic factors. And too often I think we're putting off worrying or reacting, increasing physical activity, changing diet, losing weight, the things that really we can be doing with our children to make sure they're starting life healthier. The tobacco smoking we mentioned earlier, tanning booths and excess sunburns in kids change their lifetime risk of melanoma. There are things that we can be doing right now in our society, in our schools, that will change risk going forward.
But knowing it, knowing what to do and knowing the risk. So that's so important, education, knowing how to eat right, having access to healthy foods. That's so important.
We do some of that education work from Siteman through the St. Louis American, radio programs. ACS works on these same sorts of things to help raise awareness that there's access through these programs and that there's not just access to have the screening test, but also to treatment follow-up if the test is positive.
What do you think about Angelina Jolie, and not her movies necessarily?
You know,
or her husband, God love him, is a Missourian.
He is a Missourian. I've actually met his brother. Yeah. Angelina Jolie and I have something in common. We both have the BRCA. She has BRCA1, I have BRCA2 gene mutation, and that puts us both at a higher risk of developing both a breast, ovarian, and a host of other cancers. And so by knowing that, that gives her, in her case, she was prophylactic mastectomy. She had a prophylactic partial hysterectomy. For me, I found out after I was diagnosed with breast cancer that I have the BRCA2 gene, and I was able to do a prophylactic hysterectomy, which puts me at almost no risk now of developing ovarian cancer. But if I hadn't had that, I was at much higher risk. So I think the spotlight that she puts on it for everybody, and everybody has their opinion of how she's done it, but the mere fact that we're all talking about the BRCA2 gene, the BRCA1 gene right now, and all the things that women can do, I think it's fabulous that she's talking about it, sharing her story.
Is it a growing trend, or is this just something that you do and you can afford it, and you're are more women taking this approach? Do you think this will increase?
I think it's such a personal thing, but it's so empowering to know that we can get so much information and learn so much and be able to weigh the risks and the benefits and talk through with our doctor and research the situation and make that decision.
And the costs are coming down for the test as well, which is good for people who can, now we can afford it. And insurance pays for it a great deal of the time. And I don't know if the clinic offers anything like that for people who are uninsured, but I do know that the cost has come down dramatically.
Because we don't offer it, but with the Gateway to Better Health program, for those persons who may be interested, they are referred out to the other hospital systems, and the hospital systems have a program where they can receive those on discount, and we help them with that. So it's an awesome benefit for the community.
Stick with us for 1 second. I want to go back to social media. Hashtag Stay Tuned STL. Let's see what's going on there. Tell me that. No, tell me that again. Share. We're back. Share with what you were saying.
So it's a real contrast where we have the very high-risk women in the case of breast and ovarian cancer. They can weigh up personal risks and benefits and take action. And for the rest of us, we're at lower risk. Being active, avoiding weight gain pays off, but it's a really different trade-off of risks and benefits because it's a much lower risk to start with. But as you said, 1 in 2 men will get cancer, 1 in 3 women. So it's a different equation, but we need to be working on both fronts.
Don't just take it seriously if you're in the high risk category.
Right.
Speaking of kind of the stats you were talking about there, something else we learned and that we will learn over the course of the 6 hours of the Ken Burns documentary that's coming out, African Americans are more likely to die from cancer than whites. So why is that, and how do we change that?
Well, part of it is the gap. Having access to health care and information if you don't know. And for men, that you stated, they normally don't go to the doctor. For us, one of the benefits, especially the Gateway program, it's an insurance program for individuals from 19 to 64 who's uninsured, and that's men. So for the young men in our community, that they even had the opportunity to have coverage and come into the primary care setting. So they come and they use it, which is one of the benefits of the Affordable Care Act as well. Once persons gain access to health coverage, they will seek out primary care, and that impacts African Americans. And they'll go to the doctor, and then they can learn those things and have the information. So that's the gap, having access to care, especially in North St. Louis.
And on top of access, there's also the cost, time off work, and just the ability to follow through, whether it's for a positive test to see if it's really cancer or not, if that's more time off work. Low income doesn't matter, race, ethnicity. That access is only one part of actually being able to get the whole of treatment.
And we saw in one of the tweets earlier too, just the cost that can be associated.
It is very expensive to have cancer, no doubt, even with insurance. You have time off work, loss of productivity, you have copays if you do have insurance, you have medications that aren't covered, you have all kinds of extra things that you have to buy to just like mouthwash and things like that that aren't covered by insurance, and it's expensive.
So is the gap, is it going the right direction, or is it kind of going like this in terms of who can afford and who can get access to something where they've got the DNA figured out of your particular type of cancer, and you've got a good chance of surviving it?
Well, I think it's improving, and there's also a win that we can celebrate here in Missouri. There's things that we're trying to do on the advocacy side to make things better as well. So in the past in Missouri, if you had the option of oral chemotherapy or IV chemotherapy, they were not treated the same when they were billed. And oral chemotherapy, which has less side effects, is oftentimes more targeted treatment. You can take a pill at home. It was billed as a prescription benefit, so $2,000 to $3,000 a month on average in Missouri, whereas IV treatment at times, it could just be a $20 copay for your visit. So we rallied for that, for oral chemotherapy parity, and we won. We stood by each other's side of many of the organizations across the state, and we got that to pass at the beginning of this year. It went into effect.
Is there optimism amongst, I feel like there is with you, Bev, in terms of where we're headed?
Here's the way I looked at cancer. I didn't have a choice when I was diagnosed. And when I go out and I talk to women about this and I talk to groups, you don't often have a choice in things that happen to you. But for me, I decided to view cancer as a storm in my life, and I chose to search for the rainbows through the storm, and they're around every corner. And you get to choose the attitude that you have. So for me, I think there's a positive outlook about it just because I'm still here and we're still making progress every day. And I actually took the approach of I wrote a book based on interviews with long-term breast cancer survivors around the world. So I surrounded myself with women who have beat this disease for up to 50 years. And that really changed my outlook for it. And what I tell people is to never give up hope. And there comes a time, sometimes for some, I just lost my dad to pancreatic cancer this fall. But even the way that he did cancer in the very end was his way. We took him home in those last moments, and he got to be home with us and with his pet, with our dog. He was there with his dog. So I think that never giving up hope and doing it your own way and trying to find some kind of positive aspect to it really helps. It helped me at least.
Weathering storms can be hard on your own.
It can, and you're not alone. And there is support. In St. Louis, there's so much support. There's also support online. And what I tell people too, I'm a therapist by training, so what I tell people is that you might try one kind of support. You might try a support group, for instance, and maybe it's not a good fit. That's okay. Go try another support group, or maybe try an individual therapist who specializes in helping people with cancer, or find somebody in the chemo room who's a good fit for you and you can support one another, or even just find a friend to support you through it. Online services, I've got a website where we all come together and we support each other. There might be somebody in China getting chemotherapy supporting somebody in the US getting chemotherapy, and we all support one another. There's lots of different forms of support, so find what that works for you.
Thank you all very much. Don't go too far. We want to take another look, another preview of Ken Burns' documentary that starts Monday night, Cancer, the Emperor of All Maladies. Here's another sneak peek.
Cancer is not one disease, it's many. But each of them begins in the same way, with the uncontrolled growth of a single cell. It attacks the blood, the breasts, the lungs, and every other part of the body. No one is immune to cancer, neither young nor old, rich nor poor, frail nor strong.
Cancer wants to live at the expense of your entire body and your entire being. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't care if you're a mother or a husband or a daughter or, if you have 4 children. It doesn't care. It just cares about itself.
This is a struggle of life and death, and we cannot win if we're afraid.
But human beings have refused to surrender, have always struggled to understand it. Was it God's curse? Could you cut it out? Could you burn it? Could you poison it? Was it a virus? Did it come from the outside? Or did the enemy lie within us? In the ongoing struggle to conquer cancer, massive force has sometimes meant defeat.
So this will be your last cycle.
Tragic failure has led to remarkable success. And final victory always seems just out of reach.
diagnosed, you're not an expert in the beginning. And I got to believe it's a little overwhelming with all the choices, all the decisions you have to make. Doctors, help us, give us some free advice if you don't mind. How should people approach this? How should they communicate? How should they handle this overwhelming? First, you got the emotional aspect of it, and then you got so much that you just physically got to decide. How do you help people through all that?
I think the first thing you do is you have to be cognizant of never diminishing your advocacy for the patient. You got to be their ultimate defender against all forces in the universe. You got to pull for them all the time, and you got to make sure that they're never left without hope. I mean, it's tricky, right? You want to be honest with patients, but you can't strip the thin thread of hope that sometimes holds people together. And you know, there are a lot of people that I can remember taking care of patients with a certain kind of leukemia, and they were all going to transplant. Half of them would die from the complication. And I just, you know, if you can keep people alive long enough, there's going to be new drugs, new clinical trials, and these patients are now on therapy, which is a pill only, and they're living normal lives. So you can't eliminate hope, and you got to really defend them against all the forces in the universe.
One thing that I would say is that as a patient with a new diagnosis of cancer, I mean, it is incredibly confusing. And so part of our job, I think, is to try and make it understandable. And you know, you can't go to the internet and look up breast cancer and get any kind of meaningful insight into what it means for an individual patient. And I think that's, you know, one of our job is to steer patients towards people who can explain what's going on so that they can kind of understand just at the most basic level what's going on. Because there are so many cancer survivors, you hear different things from so many different people. Everybody wants to be helpful, but sometimes our job is just to explain at the most basic level what's going on.
Anything, Bev, you would say to just someone who's, these guys can be intimidating. It's hard to, is there a right way to ask questions, or do you need a partner to be there with you to help take notes? I don't know.
I always recommend to take a friend or your husband, your wife, your mom, whoever, and take a notebook with your questions and write down your answers, because you will not remember most of what you hear, because when you're in there and you want to ask all your questions, it's very overwhelming, it's very scary. And I also tell people to always make sure that you never suffer in silence. Be honest and open with your doctor, especially when you're going through things like chemotherapy. The doctors treat the majority of symptoms that the majority of people face, but you might have a symptom that could be easily treated, but your doctor doesn't know unless you tell them. So be your own advocate when you're talking to your doctor.
I'm not Instagramming. I'm looking at Twitter questions via Twitter. This is from Brendan. He goes, _B Gates via Twitter. Is there any STL research going into viral cures for cancer?
Yeah, so.
Yes, okay.
So that,
what does that even mean?
Well, I think there can be two types of viral therapy for cancer. One is using viral vectors as a vaccine platform. And so
what does that even mean?
No. Well, we found that you can use viruses to stimulate the immune system. And this comes back to something that Dr. DiPersio was saying earlier, is that we now know that you can harness the immune system to treat cancer, and one of the ways to do that is through the use of viral vectors. And then the second way that we're using viruses to attack cancer is through the use of viral therapy or virotherapy. And that the virus actually infects the cancer and kills the cancer.
Does that mean you're not doing radiation? You're not doing chemo?
Mm-hmm. Well, most of these treatments, the viral therapies for cancer, are experimental. So typically for those experimental treatments, you would do the standard of care treatments and then and do this in addition to those standard
is that the goal, to not have to do these other,
yeah, ultimately,
cut it out, laser it out?
Ultimately, you know, these new therapies should replace the more toxic therapies. But in the initial stages, they are done in addition to them.
Here's Michael Thomason. How much are the cost of cancer treatment going up? Does prevention help? Are the costs going up? This is maybe a topic for an entire show on healthcare, but are cancer treatments overall going up? Is that, who wants to tackle that one?
I would say yes, and from a global perspective, this is one of our big challenges, given that most cancer is diagnosed in people living in low and middle income countries. And so in the high income countries, Western countries, we've got access to these new therapies which cost more, and we've got patients with cancer. Low income countries don't have access necessarily to pain relief, to drugs that we take as standard of care here. So costs are going up here, and actually the gap between sort of the haves in the high income countries and the rest of the world are getting bigger, I would say.
I mean, I would also say that, Graham is talking about sort of the impact on populations that are lower socioeconomic classes. And so it's obvious that they'd have trouble even affording cheap medication. But what's amazing is that the new medications are so expensive that it can impoverish a high middle class family in an instant. And there's something wrong with that, right? There's something wrong if you're not at fault, you get an illness, and you're suddenly impoverished by your illness, and it affects your family. So it's not only the cost of the medication is high, but the way we pay for care is got to be fixed.
Judy Martin asked, how can she find out her cancer risk? Dr. Wilson, I'll pick on you. My former colleague, Lisa Zegman, reminds me that according to Reuters, you are the most quoted scientist on the planet in the field of genomics. So you're sitting here silent. I will pick on you.
We'll be quoted then.
Can anyone be, are we mapping people in a preventative way now? Or
not yet, because we don't necessarily know everything to look for. So we know, it's a great conversation about BRCA1, BRCA2 mutations. It's something that we've learned through many years of research. And now we know that we can look for specific types of those genes in people's genomes, and that's going to tell us something about whether or not they have an increased risk for a particular type of cancer. I think we'll find additional markers like that. There's still not very many people on the planet that have had their genome sequenced. It's still pretty expensive, and even though it only takes us a day now to sequence the genome, doing the analysis and interpretation of those results can take quite a bit of time. And again, what we want to do, ideally, over the next several years is to sequence lots and lots of cancer patients' genomes, lots and lots of people who have diabetes, sequence their genomes so we can start to understand more about risk. And then we have to have a conversation about what point in your life do you have some sort of test to assess you for a particular risk of one of many diseases? Do we do that at birth? Do we do that when someone is quite young and their pediatrician then gets that information? How do the pediatricians start to make sense of this type of information? So there's a lot of work to be done. It's an incredibly promising area, and we've got to figure out all of these questions.
Angela, does that seem a long way away for the clients you work with when you're talking about people who have a hard time convincing going to the doctor?
Yes, it does. And I really want to ask, is there any way that just possibly some of the persons in low income can even participate in some of these trials and just have an opportunity? But it seems a long way away for the population we serve.
No.
But
Absolutely. I mean, Dr. Kolditz is actually has this fabulous program where women, when they come to the mammogram vans, can enroll in the study.
So we, through outreach from Siteman and through Breast Health and in a number of other programs, been working to make sure that the traditionally underserved population is fully engaged in research across the span of cancers treated at Siteman.
I asked the second table, I'll ask the gentleman from the first table, is this a scary conversation, or is this an optimistic and exciting conversation? Is this pure science for you, or is this an emotional endeavor?
It's way beyond, it gets pretty emotional for you. I mean, I talked a little earlier about a member of our team who was diagnosed with leukemia, and we were actually able to apply the science that we did, and we made a difference. We saved his life. You can't, have something like that happen and not get a much, much deeper feeling for the kind of work that you're doing.
Every time that you have a story like that, is it applied to others, or back to the idea that this is so individualized, do you start from square one with every case? Doctors as well.
Well, yes and no. I mean, quite often, John will come to us with a particular case and say, this is what we know, this is what we've tried. If we could sequence this patient's genome, or if we could look at these particular genes, it might really help us kind of figure out where to go next. And in some cases, that's gone very well, and we have pretty exciting stories to tell. In other cases, we're kind of left scratching our heads.
Square one every time, or is it building all the time?
Well, I think one thing I would like to address is that it is very personal for us, and I think part of the reason why we're all here tonight is because cancer resonates with all of us, and we all have loved ones who've been touched by cancer, and we all assume a responsibility. We become patient advocates, so every patient that we're treating, we give so that we can try to cure them of their cancer. So it resonates, I think, for all of us, and so the science is really exciting. It's a fantastic time to be studying cancer biology, but it resonates on a personal level with all of us.
Stop, hold on for 1 second. We'll finish the conversation online. Stay tuned, .9net.org. That's all the time we have for now, but don't go anywhere. Find us online. We'll continue talking. Thanks for watching. Okay, we're back online. So go ahead. You started to say.
I mean, what I was going to say is that we have actually, it's a tough business taking care of cancer patients, but it's we couldn't have a better job, right? I don't think, because I just think of one of my patients. The guy has been through chemotherapy. He's been through a transplant, 2 transplants, and he's gone through hell. And I walk in the room and he says to me, "Doc, you look tired. Did you get enough sleep last night?" So whatever problems you have in life, you look at these patients and say, I mean, how can I stop working my tail off to make progress with their diseases? I mean, they're fighting so hard, and they're so considerate of you and their family and everybody that's taking care of them. You gotta push for them. And in clinical research is one way you can do this. And I wish I could say that clinical research was completely free. It is in a sense, but the cost of care associated with clinical research has also got to be free. And that's one of the other things that as academic physician scientists we'd like to fight for, and that is when people participate in clinical trials, whatever the trial is, whether it's a phase 1, a phase 2, or a phase 3, that the standard cost of care associated with those clinical trials is also supported by providers, which is not always the case. And that chases patients away and prevents them from accessing new treatments.
And slows you down, I guess.
Slows us down. Hate to be slowed down.
Is it frustrating doing what you do for the American Cancer Society in a state that has the lowest tobacco tax, as you pointed out, or it has patchwork smoking bans that I think you believe would make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I brought it up early for a reason. It's something that is so simple that we can do and make a huge impact in our state. And it's got to be done. There's support for it.
People they can just choose not to smoke.
Right, and we're trying to get education out there, but when tobacco companies are targeting kids, we have to be able to protect them as well. And if we can raise cigarette tax and have funding to help educate and prevent, and even change packages, change as they did before, advertising, if we can continue to make that stricter, to make sure that people understand the risks when they pick it up. We think everyone knows and understands, but do they? Because why do they choose to begin smoking? And we also have to understand how difficult it is to quit. Average 7 attempts to be successful quitting
Been
smoking.
there, or you've just seen people going through it?
Well, seen people going through it, and it's an initiative with the FQACs. Right now, we're mandated to do tobacco cessation with all of our patients, and we haven't reported to the feds, and now they're holding us accountable to show results. So I understand it, and we're in Missouri, so hope we can have some success there.
People ask about the cost of health care. That's a huge burden on the cost of health care. And so there's a reason why they're asking and they're following up and making this happen.
I'm looking for more questions from Twitter. There's a few things on here. We just barely touched on the research funding aspect of things. How serious is that situation? Is that
Dire. Dire.
put it in context for us? Why is it dire? Has it gotten worse? Did it used to be better?
So the National Institutes of Health is the major funder of basic and biomedical research in this country. And it's had a flat budget for what, guys, 10, 15 years.
While the cost of what you're doing goes up, there's general inflation, things like that.
And where it's, there's a lot of research to be done in large projects, and what is really, really hard now are for young investigators, right? People who have just started their academic careers. Everybody has to write grants. You have to try to get funding. You've got an idea. There's a lot of smart people that put in grants to the NIH, and I think the percentage of them now who actually receive their first grant is what? 17%, 13%? It's quite low.
Yeah, that's one of the metrics that we follow when we're looking at funding and the availability of funding is the pay line. And so 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the pay line was between 25 and 30%. So of the grants that were submitted, almost 30% of them were funded. And now the pay line is 10, 11%. So there's been a dramatic decrease in the pay line for these NIH grants, even in the last 10 to 15 years. So,
I mean, if the pay line's 8 to 10%, that means 92% of the applications are not being funded. So it would be okay if those 92% of applications were coming from unqualified characters, but most of them are coming from well-established, distinguished at times, and at other times junior investigators who are outstanding, but just don't make the cut. And so in your lifespan without funding in academic medicine today is unfortunately short. You can't continue to support people that can't get funding forever. And so we have a natural attrition from academic medicine and from science, which is worrisome.
They say the same to me about this show. No funding, it won't be on forever. Sorry. Last word, we're just about out of time. What would you like those on a personal level who are dealing with this to know that you've learned?
I would say to always remember that you're not alone. I think that's the biggest thing, and for caregivers too, to know that you need support. I know when my husband went through it, I told him he needed to find somebody to talk to and be honest with because I was too busy fighting and going through treatment. So you're not alone, I think is the most important thing to know. And there's always hope. There's always hope.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time. We appreciate it.